not because of the cars.
I'm glad it's not in the pips.
Gladys
Wait.
right in the pips, yeah.
Did
I'm
you
one of the
say you're?
pips.
Make me
Tonight.
say that again. I know, but I need it
Well,
on
listen,
tape.
no, let me just talk to you.
Just
Do we
ignore
have
her.
to have the media?
Just look. Here,
They
here,
can't
back
come
here.
back without evidence that they were here.
I know,
Yeah,
that's right.
Anyway,
Forget
just
about it.
sticking to the cars. The first one that came over was Thomas Carr from England in the whatever it is, And then it comes on down, and then during the Revolutionary War, Samuel Carr was a colonel, and his son was George Watson Carr, and it goes on down there. And so, the George Watson Carrs, are they related to you?
Well, I know my dad's George Williams.
Yeah.
So.
But anyway, but Dabney Carr married Jefferson's sister. So then, when Dabney Carr died really early, he stood up and made a big speech in front of the House of Burgesses, and everybody said he's wonderful. And they wrote the Bill of Rights, and they got ready to do battle against the British. And then he died of a fever, and everybody mourned. You can look him up, Google.
Well, I know
Dabney Carr.
that I was
Yeah.
told that my relatives were in Congress. So,
There you go. And so then, when he died, Jefferson took over the kids and raised them. And so they were raised as Jefferson's children, and they were all white. And
I was going to go there.
their great-grandfather came from Scotland as a kid, and he was a MacDougall, and his mother was a McKendrick. And see, and so they both fought each other at Gettysburg on opposite sides, and then their kids met and married. And see, I was raised with my grandmother, so it's very recent to me. And I've got furniture up in the barn that says reupholstered, New York City upholstery, 1867, all stuff I grew up with. And there's books on the shelf that belong to Dabney Carr that are dated 1831, and it's the law books for the subscribers in the colonies of Blackstone's law, and that was the law of the land in the 1730. Until the the Revolutionary War started. So I'm really up on all this.
Oh, man.
And it's all in my house, and I would take you
I'm
and
coming
show
there on
you.
the next trip.
Last time I took somebody there, all our breakfast dishes were all over the table 3 or 4 days ago, and it was some important people, but it was the Todds looking at my little Mini. She wanted to buy my Mini, and I've never seen him since. What he's talking about is I used to fly back and forth to Channick and the lodge there, and anywhere I went, if somebody writes a postcard, it's boring sitting in an airplane. I mean, 20,000 hours of sitting in an airplane is wonderful because it's like being on a mountaintop and thinking your thoughts, and the airplane makes so much noise that nobody can talk to you. So you're alone for 20,000 hours with this view from 4,000 or 5,000 feet, whatever you want. You got time to be a philosopher. And so I would read the mail, but you don't read people's personal mail. You can't do that. But postcards are written for everybody to read. It usually says, "Hi, we're surrounded by bears. They're eating our breakfast." It's usually bullshit, but that's okay. So, right? That's what people write. So anyway, I was reading this mail, and Chris and Ken have the other Otter, and they used to work for us. And we worked together doing the bear thing. We started it, and then they went on their own. So Chris is a neat person. If you've seen the movie The Bears, the IMAX movie, they're the ones that are in that movie that we're talking about. And that's the plane right there and everything. And so I was just reading mail, and here comes Barbara, so she'll keep me straight on this. And so we're telling the story about the postcards that I was reading, because Mike told it to him much better than I did.
No,
So
I wouldn't let me finish.
now I've got to come up with it. But anyway, and they're filming it. So I'm trying to be honest. But, so if you hear me telling a lie, don't say a word. Anyway, I was reading the postcard, and it was this really neat little postcard of a parachute coming down with a heart hanging from it, and it said, "I have met the most wonderful bearded bush pilot, and I'm in love." And I thought, oh, geez, poor girl. I'm married, I'm happy, why in the world, what am I going to do with her? So then I thought, and I worried about it all the way home, and a couple of days later I finally realized, well, wait a minute, Ken's got a beard. I didn't know that they were falling in love with each other. All I knew was that she was sending out these postcards. So when I found out that he'd stayed over there and they'd spent the night in the airplane and all that kind of stuff, I realized what had happened, because he has a beard too, so it wasn't me. So every time we have a party, and they're there. I tell this story on myself, but that's it. See, it's kind of nothing. Name at the end of the movie, and we were really excited because if you spell your name the same as ours, we may be relatives. Well, it turned out that I was a relative, and they were. I'm the oldest of the name, and Jose is the only other one. But my father, his father was Spanish, his father was Belgian. So this Belgian, the DeCreeft that we're talking about, he went to Belgium. He was in charge of the king's honor guard because the king liked foreigners because they wouldn't take over his army, and throw him out. And so he always had, and the Belgians, it was the Walloon Guards, and the Walloon Guards were like the Scots Guards or all of those. They used noblemen as officers, and then anybody that was in the country was it. So this ancestor went to Spain. He married a Spanish countess, but nobody knew this. I mean, my father was a 6-year-old kid when his father died, and I'm 250 years from my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather, and you think about great-grandparents, they're just around the corner everywhere. But my great-grandfather was born in 1759. He went to Spain. He married the Spanish lady. Their son was married in 1820. And then his son was born in, my father was born in 1884, and I was born in 1932. So it's just 3 generations from, great-grandfathers, that's what they are, but in 250 years. And they were all 60-year-old guys that married 18-year-old girls. Barbara said, I've already married my 18-year-old girl, because that's how old she was when they were married. So anyway, they wrote back, and so when we went to Belgium and looked them up, and it was really neat, and they were really excited. He dragged out this chart, showed it to me, it's on the wall in my house. I'll end up taking you up there, I know it. But I showed him, I said, well, let's see, okay, well, there's my great-grandfather right there. And he said, I exaggerate, I'm sure, but he turned white, and he wouldn't even stand underneath the coat of arms that was on the wall. He said, and he rattled off a bunch of French. The gist of it was, no, it's not me, it's you. Because the only ones alive in Europe, and they were the only ones alive anywhere, and they're all dead now. This guy died a few years ago. They're all the third line, and this is really important in nobility and all that stuff. So the third line was in Europe, and they bring it clear down to 1937 on this chart, but the second line died out. They just said, oh yeah, this guy went to Spain, he married a Spanish lady, and they had children. And that's my line, and the first line died out. So all of a sudden and I thought, oh, I must be a count. Well, I'll be a no account anyway, but actually, I would rather be a knight than a count, because a count is sort of a landlord, and the knight runs around. And so I tell all my friends, all the girls, I say, if you're ever in trouble, just get under a tree, start crying, tear your blouse, and I'll come riding along, and we'll all be fine.
We'll all be
It's in
fine.
my blood. I can't help it. I'm like a Doberman Pinscher.
You just rate on our women that have their blouse open.
Well, no, but I save them. I don't molest them. I save them. I don't molest them. But
Yes, that's their wake up call.
They've got to really look unhappy.
Before
They
cell
gotta
phones.
Hair down, crying. Willow trees are really
Damsels in distress.
Damsel, that's what we specialize in. And the thing is, I have run around and rescued people and done all that kind of stuff, and I always wondered, what is it that makes me do that? I mean, what is it that when somebody says somebody's gone, you got to run out and find them, A lot of people say, oh yeah, they'll find. But anyway, it's an instinct, and I never understood it before. But it's just like a Doberman Pinscher will bite you, I'll find you.
That is exactly right.
What is it that makes the Irish Setter and the St. Bernard? They'll get you drunk, but they'll rescue you too.
That's right. It's a lot of fun because I grew up on Prince Valiant and all that. We raised goats when I was a kid. And all I knew was my father he's a very well-known Spanish
You didn't know you were
sculptor.
royal.
I didn't know it, but now I do. And we refugeed from the Spanish Civil War when I was 5 years old, landed in Santa Barbara. And I remember it, the Lexington was right there in Santa Barbara Harbor. They were looking for Amelia Earhart. So I'm standing there holding my mother's hand, watching this great big aircraft carrier come in. And then we were in Santa Barbara ever since. And so my folks were divorced when I was about 6. And my father, he barely spoke English. We got to be really good friends. He was a neat guy and a funny guy. And he did Alice in Wonderland that's in Central Park in New York. and he did The Poet in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, and he's done really beautiful sculpture, and he was famous for it because he was the first one since the Greeks that did direct carving. Take granite and carve right into it instead of making a maquette and then they make it for you. So he, in the 20s, he was really a big guy, you know. But nobody out here or on the West Coast knows him that well. But for Anita, her mother, to just make those bears, just twist them out of a piece of clay, it's just amazing to me. And Barbara was an artist in college. So everybody but me, and I just do airplanes.
What's your own artistic work on there? So.
But it was pretty neat. So the Chevalier is the head of the family, and it's by primogeniture. So I looked it up on the internet. I found Belgium. I found the list of knights. There's a little asterisk after the DeCreeft, and it says there are 200 knights in Belgium. 100 of them are hereditary, and if there's an asterisk, that's hereditary. So you go to it. So I'm a hereditary knight, and then it says that there are. It says that the oldest member of the family by primogeniture is the guy, and that's me. And then there's Jose after me.
I think I have to.
Well, you don't have to. Watch that blouse. That's the main thing. Be really careful. I'll go get a horse.
I'll go get a horse.
I'll get a sword.
My knight in shining
Since
armor.
I'm doing this and I'm being recorded, I'll be embarrassed for the rest of my life, which won't be long, hopefully. The thing about the Hesbaye Knights, if you look up the Hesbaye Knights, they were the toughest. They had the fanciest armor, but they were the baddest guys. You could make a wonderful movie about those guys because in 16 or 15 something, the townspeople and all the riffraff in this town got together, and all the guys were out fighting the war. They were in Jerusalem or someplace, and they took these guys and they took all their castles and they killed their wives, they burned their kids, and they raped the wives before they did it. And these guys came back and they were pissed. So they closed every gate, and there were like thousands of the others, and there were only 60 of these knights came riding into town and said, "What? You've been doing that to my gang?" So they closed all the gates to the town, and then they just killed them all. And that happened. It's in. There was a historian of that time who wrote it all down, and you'll find it if you look. Hesbaye Knights, Hesbaye. So and it was right in that little section between Belgium and Germany, and in there. So they were bad. They had all the, and then this is really not politically correct, but I tell people, well, the French killed all their nobility. They just chopped their heads off, so that there's none of them that are left that are any good. And in Spain, and in Belgium, all the good ones went to Spain. So, and if you knew some of the Belgian nobility, you'd agree. We'll go into details now. But anyway, so that's my story. And it's all out of just nowhere. It's all just, all I am is me.
From flying somebody to McNeil.
Flying somebody to McNeil and stick them out the door.
Was the fake mustache? Was that the guy when you got over there?
No. Well, Larry was in charge down there. But the funniest one I ever took.
Your guy that you said came to the door and he had like a painted on mustache.
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
My ancestor, John Nicholas DeCreeft, John Louis Nicholas was the guy that went to Spain. And he went because he wasn't the first son, see. He was the second son. They don't get anything. The third son joins the church, the second son joins the military, and the first son takes over the castle and all that stuff. And it's been like that for 1,000,000 years. So, being as he was the second son, he didn't have anything. And so off he went to Spain. And then he got on the wrong side, and his son, my grandfather, got on the wrong side. They threw him in prison. Then they said, "No, you can come out." And he said, "No, I changed my coat once. I'm not changing it again." So he stayed in prison, got really sick, and that's what killed him. But there was a girl that brought him. There was a chocolate shop in town, and the daughter of that chocolate shop came to see him all the time and bring him stuff, And they fell in love and they got married. So that's. But I don't know her name. I don't know what happened to the Belgian. I don't know where he died. But something really interesting is that Google has spent $6 million or something copying all the books that aren't copyrighted. And the Harvard University in their library have all these old books on Spain. And so you can Google it. And I found he called himself Louis DeCreeft because he took his middle name and used it. And there's Colonel Louis DeCreeft with with the hussars of the San Narciso, and they're running all over Spain and knocking down buildings with cannons. He's all through there. And this is the 200-year anniversaries, because 1808 and 1809 to now is 200 years.
Yeah.
And so I find him, they're talking about him in Spain right now. They're giving a series of lectures, and there's one building in Corona that he said, it said Colonel DeCreeft knocked down the building because it was in his line of fire. So I mean, and there's none of us left, it's just him and me. And, it's amazing to just keep finding your own guy. I don't know where he died, I don't know when he died. I know when his son died, which was my grandfather, and I know my father, But that guy there, I'll find him. Every night I get on there and I put in DeCreeft, and then there's like 40,000 things you got to plow through. And I'm some of them, Jose, some of them, we keep getting in trouble. But isn't that neat? I mean, let's go see him. And it's a chateau, which also means castle, but this wasn't. This was a long, old building in a kind of a semicircle. And this is the guy with the big head. So when we went in there, I was just thinking, wow, this is where my great-great-grandmother was a little girl and raised here. I just, it's really interesting to go for those feelings. And so, and meantime, and he's walking around, and the wallpaper was this color, brown. But there was a beautiful spot on it that was white with blue and green flowers and just really pretty. And he said, well, actually, that's the real color, but 400 years ago, they moved a piece of furniture, and that's what was behind it. And it hasn't gotten dirty yet, so who knows how old the rest of it was to get brown. And so, and while he was talking, I looked at the back of his head, and I thought he had really short hair and a kind of a brow line like that, just short, and that's paint. And he had painted the top of his head, and he didn't know I was coming. This was just the way he got up in the morning and went to work. And he was wearing rubber boots, and he'd been working out and back in the garden. And so that's when I told Barbara, this is a screwy place. All the good ones went to Spain. I'll be so sorry I read that all. I don't care. I outrank them all.
There you go.
Lucky they still got their heads.
No, that is fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is to me because I grew up in Santa Barbara. I couldn't even speak English when I hit the country. I was 5 years old, and I got teased in school. I learned English, and my mother was an artist and completely impractical. And we raised goats. We had 40 goats in the mountains behind Santa Barbara. And she worked at Lockheed making P-38s during the war. She took that money and bought this property, and that's where we grew up. And I grew up like a goat myself, And so I had a scholarship to good schools, and I'd play with these kids, and they were kids with an enormous mansions in Montecito behind Santa Barbara. And we all went to the Coral Casino together, and we'd go to school, and so we were just all kids, and it didn't matter who had what. But I noticed a difference, and I'd get in fights over goats all the time. I'd see somebody beating up on a goat, and I'd say, my Doberman Pinscher blood would come to the top, but I didn't know what it was. And I'll tell you another thing about me. When I went in the Army, I took I went to art school in New York City for a year in 1950, and I really got the scholarship there because of my father. And then in the Korean War had started, and I could see I was going to get drafted, and I thought, I'll just be in with a bunch of New Yorkers, I won't like that. So I went home to California, and they didn't draft me, and I finally enlisted. But when I didn't even think about Korea. I mean, the war was going on, but I had no worries. And so what happened is that one day we were all out in this field. They said, you're going to go to NAS, you're going to be like a counter spy, you're going to go to officers candidate school, all these wonderful things. You don't even have to record this. But this is pertinent because of what's happening in the world nowadays. You're either on the right side or you're the wrong side. And the right side changes and the wrong side changes, and people will shoot you just for being on the wrong side.
Right.
So when the Spanish Civil War started, Franco's soldiers came into town, and my father had these guys working for him, building, helping on a castle he was doing sculpture for. And they said, well, you guys are communists. And they said, no, we're not communists. And they said, well, then you're for Franco. And they said, no, we're not for Franco either. And they said, well, then you're communists. And they shot him. And it really teed my father off. And these are guys that used to tease me, saying they were going to put me in a crab pot, I mean, we were in Mallorca, which is all just ocean front, and beautiful in 1937 and 35 and 32. So it just really made him mad, and he didn't speak English very well, and someone subscribed him to the Daily Worker, and I'm sure there was a little feeling there anyway, because they weren't for Franco, that's for sure, and all these Spanish expatriates came to New York City, and they all did various things, and when I was visiting there, we would all go out to dinner. I mean, I was an 18-year-old kid, and Julio de Diego was there, and Gypsy Rose Lee was married to him, and it was a different thing. We were all down in the village. And then they all left, and I lived in the village by myself for a year and went to art school, rode my bike all the way to Central Park. It was a neat place to be. But the upshot of it was, when I got in the Army, then they came along and they said, we want someone named DeCreeft. We want DeCreeft. And it was a big field of us, so they came and found me. And they said, we need you to come back with us to headquarters. I went to headquarters. Some major talked to me. He said, you're not going to go to... You're not going to NAS. You're not going to go to Officers Candidate School. You're in the Army now, or the infantry, because your father's an avowed communist. I said, well, I don't know anything about that. I hadn't even lived with him since I was 6 years old, and I got so mad. And then I find out you're Jewish. But you know what? It's even more intriguing than that. When you start studying it, my coat of arms is 3 lions. It's 3 black lions with red crowns, tongues, and claws. And the lion is one of the it was old in 800, and the lion actually comes from David. It's the Lion of David, of Judah, or whatever.
Right, Lion of Judah.
And so, and they went to Spain, and they went to Ireland.
They did.
And all that stuff spreads out, and you get the Carolingians and the Merovingians and all this kind of stuff. And you can just go nuts late at night, clacking away on the internet. I didn't even know how to type 5 years ago until I got a computer, and so I'm like this. And to me, it's like tapping on the jail cell wall, trying to make communication with some other guy. Well, if you got 90 years, or 5 to 10 even, then you can tell your whole story by tap, tap, tap for for C, But for me, it's about that hard to type. And I've gotten to where now I can type as fast as I can write. And so I write emails to all my friends, and someday I will write a book, but probably not. I mean, life is interesting too.
Well, if you
And
just tell
how
it to
did
us.
you get to Alaska? I mean,
I just always wanted to come up here. I was flying, and what happens is I bought a Grumman Goose, like they used to fly to Catalina, those amphibs.
oh, okay.
And I bought one Army surplus. Barbara had a little money, and I helped her get rid of it. And so we bought a Goose Army surplus, and I worked on that thing for about 10 or 12 months, and I got it going. And then I had the GI Bill, and so I was going to Pomona, and all my friends there were coming up here to fight fires. And they said, well, geez, Bill, if you know how to fly a Goose, and you got one, you ought to be in Alaska. And I said, well, I've always been interested in Alaska, and I was already subscribed to the Alaska magazine. So we came up here. I packed up, well, let's see, her mother was 3 years old, and my son was 18 months, and we piled in the Goose and flew up here.
What year was that?
That was 1962.
Oh my God.
And then I had an accident at the end of the summer, and I got really banged up, and had to go back to California, and I joined a pipe band, and and so it saved my hip. My hip was all dislocated. I was all dinged up, and I finally got to where I could march the whole length of State Street playing the bagpipes, ogling the girls where they were sitting on the curb, and not lose track of which measure we were on. So anyway, it was a neat life, and I wouldn't have left it for anything but Alaska. But we came back up here after about 3 years. And by then I had an old Model 185, and then I had 3 of those, and then I got the Beaver, and then I got in the Otter. Which, there I am, there's all of them. See, that's me next to the Travelaire when I got it in 69. That's me in front of the Otter when I got it in 76. That's me in front of the Beaver when I got it in 70. So I tell people it's a kid that used to hang around, but he made me old, so I got rid of him. But anyway, it's, and so, I had a chip on my shoulder because of this accident, but it wasn't just that. So every time somebody would be missing, I would jump in, because I lay there on a hillside for 3.5 hours while they were looking for us, and when they told Barbara I was dead.
So what happened in the accident? Do you
Where
mind?
were you going?
I crashed,
Oh,
And
really?
it was a combination of things, and it's too hard to go into
Right.
momentarily. I'll be sorry I told it, because it just doesn't make sense unless you were there. but it wasn't my fault. But I learned a lot from it, and that was 46 years ago, and I put in 24,000 hours since, and I've grabbed a few people that were floating around and things like that.
But they told Barbara you were dead?
Yeah, they just said, well, there are no survivors, you know. And so then a fishing boat came up the bay and found us, and I had crawled around and gotten a guy's tongue out of his throat where he was choking, and I could hear people dying, and it was a bad deal, but it had already happened. There was nothing I could do about it. And we hit 200 miles an hour upside down, took out 3 30-inch spruce trees. I went right through the windshield. The chair legs, I was strapped to the chair, and they broke off right here, so I still had the seat fastened to me, and the chair legs were still bolted to the airplane. But when it hit, it rolled over like that, and the left engine, which was on my side, hit a tree, and so it broke the airplane up, and out I went. So, you know, it all depends on how you see things. If you think you were saved for something else, or if you just know that you're just lucky, or you just don't know what it's all about. I don't know what it's all about.
What made you driven?
Yeah, but it did. And I knew I just laid there and I thought, God, if they hurry, we'll be alive. But if it takes them too long, we're not going to make it. And you don't have to have that thing going, and I hope you'll use your discretion.
I will.
But anyway, I had so much bone marrow in my bloodstream from so many broken bones that it would have killed us that night. It would have killed me because your blood's just too rich. Your kidneys won't handle it.
That's right. Because I know people have had bone marrow transplants.
You never would have lived through the night. So it was true. I just figured, and I was conscious the whole time, and I was crawling around with this seat strap, maybe, but my hip was dislocated. And so then it was about 3 weeks in the Providence Hospital, and then they loaded me on an airplane on a forklift and sent me to California, and then I joined the pipe band and started marching.
Well, maybe that's why you rescue people and have, because of...
It's just you know, it's so simple.
Combination.
If you are driving to work some morning and you see a guy hit a telephone pole,
right.
You're going to run over and try and help him. Some people won't. Some people will drive by and think, well, thank goodness that wasn't me. Some people think it's none of my business, but
no,
if you've got a heart and a soul, you're going to... And up here it's even more so because it's all airplanes. Working for a logging camp, if a guy gets hit by a tree, you pick him up, you load him in your airplane. It's the slowest thing in the world to fly a guy to the hospital who's been hit by a tree. His eyes are rolled back and they're twitching. You think, God, he'll never live. Then later in the day, because they're loggers, you see a guy with groceries and all that, and he's climbing on the airplane going back to work, and the next day they're working. It doesn't hurt him. But it's tough on the pilot, I'll tell you that. So, you know, you just, and also a couple of times the Coast Guard would get on there and somebody'd be sinking, and they'd say, well, we're saying, okay, well, how many life jackets on board? What's this? They'd run the poor guy's battery down before it's just like 9/11. You know, you hear dumb ones, and they're talking to some poor kid that's sobbing because they got a dead body next to him, and they say, well, yeah, but what does she look like? Is she blue? So it's the same thing. So I just told Barbara, I'm just always going to go look, and sometimes you're the first one there, and you know, you never saw a movie called To Brave Alaska, but that's a movie they made in Hollywood about finding those 2 kayakers that I did. So there's Bill DeCreeft in there, and Barbara's a cute little redhead, and it's corny. It was nowhere near as bad as what happened to those 2 kids. But it was one of those things that makes you want to brag because it turned out really well. I mean, they had killed their dog that night to eat it, and they couldn't eat it because they said, well, it's a friend, and it was raw, and couldn't swallow it, and they just said, let's just die there. And just in the evening, I came zinging by, you know, and then there were rocks there, so I'll tell you the story if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm crying. Just keep going.
Well, they called me up and said, you got an amphibian, right? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, is it, you know, everybody in Seward, their airplane is all covered with snow, or, you know, something's wrong, but we got to get to this mine and check on these 2 kids. And so if you can get over there, pick up some ore samples and see how they're doing and all that. And I said, well, okay. And it was over the mountains. And this was January, 3rd of January, cold, you know, really cold. And so I took off and I flew over there, and I was in the Widgeon. And so when I got over there, the pass was blocked. It was just snowing too hard. I couldn't get through. So I came back and I called up this character from Seward. And in the movie, they make me living in Seward, but I wasn't. I was down here. So I called him up and said, well, I couldn't get through, and today's Saturday, tomorrow's Sunday, and we generally try and take Sunday off, so how about if I just go on Monday? And he said, well, it's been quite a while. And I said, well, so how long? He said, well, 2.5 months. And I said, you mean there's 2 kids in a hard rock mine over in this bay in Alaska that nobody's talked to for 2.5 months? How do you know the building? How do you know everything didn't collapse on them? How do you know they're not trapped in there? All my instincts start, you know, I didn't know if they had blouses or not, but I think pretty close to it. They're under that tree.
Where's my horse?
So I went over the next day, and I went to the bay where and the snow was about 10 feet deep, everywhere. You couldn't, no tracks anywhere. And I thought, well, they did say they had a skiff, so there's another gold mine up at the head of the bay. So I flew up there, and there's a skiff sitting on the beach, and a red flare goes up. And I thought, oh, neat. And it was blowing about 40 miles an hour down the hill. It was Chinooking, and so it made it warm. It was below freezing, but that hot air had it, and I thought, well, I can land the widgeon here. So I landed, and I taxied up to the beach. And a widgeon is an amphibian like a goose, you know, with a boat nose. And I pulled right up to the beach, and I opened the nose hatch, and this black dog just jumps right in, sat right in the seat next to me, and he was there. And his name was Winchester, and I'll never forget him, just because of that. Winchester jumped in the airplane. The guy said, I'm sorry I flagged you down, but we're in trouble. And I said, well, I think I'm probably looking for you. And so there's Myra. So, told her to take a seat. So, anyway, I said, well, I'm probably looking for you. And he said, yeah, I came from Surprise Bay Mine, and, you know, we were iced in, and I just got to get home. And I said, well, yeah, but what about the 2 kids? There were 2 young hippies. And he said, oh, they're dead. And I said, oh, geez, what happened? He said, well, they left here 3 weeks ago, and if they haven't gotten to town now and told you about me and everything else that's going on, they got to be dead. And I said, well, okay. And I took him to Seward. I gave him $20 to buy a hamburger because he was pretty hungry too. But he had found a snow machine at this mine, tried to get over the top of the mountain, blew the clutch, came back, welded the clutch with a welder he found somewhere, and then he'd spotted a moose that he was going to shoot, and he saw another moose. He'd have made it through the winter. He was in good shape. But Roger and Denise this guy was kind of uncouth, and they were all in one cabin, and he kept farting and making remarks and hitting on Denise. So they said, well, we got to get out of here. So they moved out of that inner bay to an outer bay to a little cabin. And that's where they were. So when they ran out of food, they couldn't get into him because he was behind the ice. And so they got in their little kayak, loaded it down, and took off. And he knew that there was a logging camp, but it was actually way down on the end of the peninsula. That's where I used to pick up those sick loggers. But they had a map that only went so far. And the first 2 days they did really good. They were paddling along. But see, it was the 23rd of December, and those days are about 2 hours long. I mean, the sun comes up at 10, and you know. So, and as they were going by Gore Point, the sea started to get rough. And they came around the outside of Gore Point, and they came down that outside beach, and Denise said, Roger, let's quit here. And he said, no, let's, might be something around the corner. And she said, no, there is a beach, let's get on it. And the waves were already going up and down like this. And there were 30-foot seas by that night. So they got on the beach, they put up their little tent, they dragged the kayak up. In the middle of the night, kabam, this 30-foot wave hit them, blew the kayak all to pieces and knocked it around, took their tent and rowed it out to sea and left them with nothing. And so then they said, well, geez, what are we going to do now? So they tried to climb a waterfall that was frozen. He chopped holes with his knife, got almost to the top, the knife broke, down he went. Denise tried it, and she fell off, and the duffel bag they had that had the food and the stove and a blanket, that went into the ocean. So then they had nothing. And actually, I used to tell people, you should, on about the 3rd of January, you should get outdoors, strip down to nothing, wet your clothes, and roll up in an old blanket and spend the night under a spruce tree. And they did that for 13 nights. They tried to, and so anyway, that was before I took off looking for him. So the next morning, there was when I dropped him in town, and then the guy that owned it, and he was a drunk. He'd come out of his haze every once in a while and say, hey, somebody go down to the mine and see how they're doing. And he didn't even realize time was going by, so it was 2.5 months since he dropped him off and told him he'd be back in a couple of weeks. And their radio had quit. The last thing they heard, there was a war going on in Iran or something like that. And they said, see, nobody cares. They've forgotten about us. There's just nothing. We're just here, and so that's why they took off. Everybody, this went all over the world. It was in European newspapers, and it was just. I mean, I was in my seventh heaven when I actually found them in the Doberman Pinscher at work, you know. So anyway, the next morning I went out to the airport, and there was a Coast Guard helicopter there, and I said, "You guys, have you seen anything of the people?" They said, "No, but yeah, actually we could tell you. They were really keeping the information to their chest. I'm not proud of them, and this is another thing you'll have to clean out, but." They didn't want to share this. I think they needed the credit, or it was worth, you know, government funds or whatever it was. They weren't going to tell me anything. And I said, but they said, we did find 2 crossed canoe paddles on Gore Point Beach. And I said, well, then somebody's alive. And they said, well, yeah. So I said, well, do you mind if I fly over there too? They said, no, just kind of stay out of our way. And that wasn't snottiness. They just meant we don't want to have to worry about hitting each other. So away they went. And the way I went, my little widget, I went over there the next day. And I have found people before, and what happens is your boat sinks, you're sitting on the beach and thinking, oh God, now what? And zoom, an airplane flies by, and it's gone. And you never got a chance to say anything or put up a sign or say hi even. And so what I used to do is fly right around the bay one time, make noise, and then they'll come out on the beach. And the best way to get found is just throw rocks in the water, because you can't wave anything as big as that big white splash. And it makes a big white splash, and the pilot sees it, and there you are. And I learned that from the fish and game guys. They'd say, well, we'll be on the beach somewhere, Bill, and we'll throw a rock in the water when it's time to pick you up. So anyway, I started looking for them, and I could see these footprints in the snow just going up and down, and it's a sheer cliff where they were. It was, Gore Point is the furthest point out. When they give the weather, they give you Gore Point North and Gore Point South. It's a tough spot. And so the Coast Guard helicopter was still in the area, and I called them and I said, you know, there's tracks all over this beach. And they said, yeah, but there's no floaters. And they meant bodies. They look for bodies floating in the surf. And so I said, yeah, but, you know, they're running up and down the hillside. There's got to be somebody. And you could see where they were dragging their duffel bag. You could see the dog prints. The dog was with them. And so they said, well, yeah, anyway, we've already searched the bay, and go have fun, you know. So away they went. Well, then I went around this thing, and I was just going every inch of the shoreline, and I looked down, and here's a circle of spruce trees, branches, and a guy in the middle of it waving a flag. And you talk about bringing tears to your eye. The hair went up in the back of my neck, and I just thought, it is as exciting as finding a moose. When you go moose hunting, if you can find a moose standing next to the lake where you can shoot him and not have to carry him very far, that's very exciting. A guy, he's waving a flag at me, but it's too rocky and too dark, getting too late for me to taxi him there with a boat amphibian, you know. And so they said, okay, yeah. And then I said, how soon will you be here? And they said, well, 15 minutes. And 25 or 30 minutes went by, no Coast Guard. So I climbed back up, got to 6,000 feet, called Barbara and said, get them. And so finally, and they came back on. And I said, where are you? And they said, well, we're searching. And I said, what the hell are you searching for? I'm looking at him, and he's right under me, and I could only see one guy. So they grudgingly came in. Then it was full dark, but it was neat for me to watch it because this big searchlight goes on and shines down, and the basket goes down, and the guy climbs in. It was like watching, it was surrealistic, you know, just Star Wars or something. And they just picked him up and put him into civilization. And meantime, I thought, well, only one of them, that means the girl's dead. And I was feeling bad. I thought, you know, poor kid, get dragged out in the country and left, you know, drowned or died of cold. So anyway, and they just took off for town. They never said a word to me. And I realized, well, I'm being left behind. So I went after them, and then they turned around and came back. And the searchlight goes on again, never a word to me. And another basket load comes up, and it's the girl. I thought, oh, neat. And then they just head for Homer. So I just gave the widget a needle, and I got here first. But there were 2 moose walking down the runway. It was night, and I had to buzz them and get them off the runway. And of course, they were in a helicopter, so they landed. And I ran over to the ambulance and opened the door, and I looked in, and here's this skinny little guy and a skinny little girl. And they're all, you know, they just look miserable. You'll see pictures of them somewhere. But anyway, I said, well, what about the dog? They said, oh, we had to kill it. We had to kill it, but we couldn't eat it. It was our friend. And away they went to the hospital, So then I'm beginning to feel good about it. Now I really thought, man, this is neat. And because I have looked for I've carried families out in the inlet and looked for bodies. And a father, I took him out there, and it was dead calm. The boat had sunk the night before. We went all the way from here to Chinnik, and you could see every bread wrapper floating in the inlet. It was dead calm. And he said, well, we landed at Chinnik Lake so we could use, take a leak. And he said, well, I really lost a good son. And I talked about that one. But you're looking at a guy who just realized his son has died. He was an 18-year-old boy who just caught a ride over on the boat that night. And I talked to him. I was coming home, and I knew the boat, and I called him up and said, how's it going? They said, oh, it's going pretty good. We're doing good. And the fish shifted or something during the night and turned them over, and they sank. And so after that, to find two guys alive and and they're in town and it's really cold winter. So I went up to the hospital and talked to them. We got to be buddies. We put them in a wheelbarrow, and I cooked a rice, and we had a big party. And they were just, he said, well, we're just like R2-D2, because they didn't have feet, and they were on crutches and everything else. And so we made them feel good. We had a big party, and they had a ball. And Dr. Sayer, your buddy, was in charge. And they said, no, he just wants our teeth. He's waiting until we die and get our teeth, because he has a gold mine. He has a gold mine. But Roger was really funny that way. And anyway, their story was that they had no food, and every night they found one clam, and it was dead, and they ate it, and it made them sick. And I love mussels, and I eat them. We had them for dinner the other night, and the rocks were just covered with mussels, but they had no idea that they could have been eating them. They could have been fat when I found them instead of starving to death. And they had shot a wolf, and then he tried to kill the wolf with a hatchet, and they did, but then it was too tough to eat. Mm-hmm. And then they finally killed their dog, this little dog that had been with them all the time they'd been at the mine. And as I say, Roger said, we couldn't cook it. And we just said, this is a friend. He said, before I eat a friend, I'd rather die. Then he wanted to shoot them both. He had 2 bullets left for his gun. And he said, Denise, they're never going to come for us, because, they'd heard this stuff on the radio and nobody come along. So he said, well, let me shoot you and then I'll shoot myself, and then we're out of this, because 13 nights their feet would freeze, and then the next day they would thaw them out. So you're not supposed to do that. If you're ever in that situation, you leave them frozen, then you just like meat in the freezer and you'll be fine. One thawing isn't that bad, but to thaw 13 times just destroys all the tissues. So, and they, I can't remember, they just didn't eat, and they would walk a little bit every day. And so they had worked their way around from the point, around to Sunday Harbor. And when I took them later in the airplane and showed them where they were and where they had to get to, they just started crying, because they realized they were never going to make it. And so then they realized how lucky they'd been. And the papers called them, pilot says, couple lucky and stupid. And I said, yeah, you're lucky and you're stupid. We just made a joke of it,
Yeah.
But it was in Europe and everything. My father, who was still alive, he said, oh, you do bring honor to the family name. And that really still meant something to him, artist though he was, and communist or whatever he was. It really put him over the top when I found him.
You were the knight.
And all the papers. Yeah.
You were that
I didn't
knight.
know it, see. I didn't know it then.
You didn't know. Well, what?
And their
when
blouse,
they saw
I never
you-
checked Denise's blouse. It's the biggest mistake.
Maybe she wasn't waving with it?
Myra doesn't know what I'm
grandpa.
talking about. But when I found out I was a knight, I told all my friends, if you're a girl and you get lost and you're really having a bad time, you just get under a tree, let your hair down, start crying. Willows are the best trees. And then tear your blouse, and I'll come riding along.
Such are the rules.
But anyway, it was a happy ending. They lost some toes. They finally broke up, and Denise, she married. I know, but Roger didn't treat her very well, and this really you can't say anything about. But I've got their gun, and the barrel's bent where he bent it over her head, I think. But they had a fight. She had a big black eye when I picked him up, and she never would talk about where it came from. And she said, "No, I don't want you to shoot me. I'm going to keep crawling until I die, because I want to see my mother one more time." It's a heartbreaker. Before I die, I'm going to see my mother. If I live, and if I don't, then that's when I'll die. Roger says, okay, I'm not going to leave you behind. I'd shoot myself, but then you'll be all alone. So gentleman that he was, he didn't step off the planet. You know?
With the gun.
Yeah, and when I roared over and then didn't land, they thought, see, they really don't care because they had seen the helicopter pilot go by. They said we could see him. He was looking out the door. His elbows were on his knees. He looked right at us and ignored us, and that just broke their hearts. And that was just before dark, and I hadn't come by yet, so it was really set up for me because then when I came by, they said, "Oh, look at this! This is after 13 days of nothing." And then I climbed up and disappeared because I was calling Barbara. And then I came back and buzzed him and disappeared again. And they didn't know what was going on. They said, he's just...
Were they in a snowfield?
They were on it's a little point with a lake on it, and they were standing on the lake, which was frozen.
Yeah.
We went back later, and that's when we brought the gun out and found a few of their things and stuff. We went by helicopter.
What year was that?
1980.
Oh, 80.
1980, because I just can't help bragging, but this is all Doberman. In 1979, I was one of the heroes of the decade. For the 70s, they had some guys in there that had found various people and done various things. And my picture's there. I'm looking out the Otter door with a big grin, looking pretty cocky. And it said 5 heroes of the decade. Well, then in 1980, I did this. So I was really riding high for a while. I just needed a big black Frisian.
You needed that black horse. White
So
horse.
anyway,
Horsepower.
yeah. It was it was really a nice thing to have happen, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me, and certainly good for them. But they didn't stay together because they'd had their arguments, and Roger kind of finked out on her, and she was tough. I mean, she was just a little hippie girl, And she married a guy that worked at GM in Detroit, and I suppose he's out of a job now, but they've got kids and everything. And Roger, he moved down to Louisiana. He went to work. He helped me on the airplane a little bit, because I gave him a little bit of a job. I told him, I said, I'm screwed because the Chinese say that if you save somebody's life, you're responsible for them the rest of their life. So they kept reminding me, okay, Bill, what do we do now? When's food? When are you going to feed us? So Roger learned enough on that he ended up working on President Bush's airplane. But and then he disappeared, and he lived in a little shack right on the edge of the water in Louisiana, and I've never heard from him since the Hurricane Katrina. Oh, wow. I think he just washed away. But he wanted to get lost, so if he did wash away and grab something, he would never he wouldn't have told anybody. He just was a strange guy. He came back after a few years to see me and stay in my house while Barbara and I went to Europe and met the Belgians. And he said I could just lie there in bed at night. He said, why did I ever come back? All that cold is coming back to get me. It really spooked him.
Yeah, I visited with him a lot when you told me who he was.
Yeah, and he used to, in the hospital, he was like a squirrel in your house, All the drawers were full of food. Anything he didn't eat, he'd put it in the drawer next to him. And the drawers were just packed with food, bread and butter and whatever, just anything.
Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
But what a deal, though,
So when did you get into flying? I mean, after having the influence.
I actually, while we were in high school, I soloed in 1948, and that was, we'd run out at night and do that. We left pillows in our beds and played music, had music going in the thing. We were just really outlaws, And then when I went in the Army, I soloed the day before I went in the Army in Santa Barbara. That's October 3rd, 1951, and then I went to Korea in 52. I came home in 53. Barbara and I got married in 54, and we went to Claremont because that's where Scripps was, and she was going to Scripps. And I went to Pomona for 1 year, and I took writing, and I was in the same class. I mean, we were in the same writing class with. Names are really tough for me. I am getting old, but it's the guy that became a rock star, the musician, the Caroline, do you know who I mean? Christopherson.
Oh, Christopherson.
We were in the same class. He was just a big crew cut kid,
Oh my God.
And I wrote something he liked, and I was just kind of whoever would have thought that he'd end up the way he did, but he actually ended up going to Vietnam and all that stuff. But anyway, so that was in 54, and then I thought, well, I could write, but I'd rather fly, and you can write anytime.
Were you flying in the military though?
No,
Is that,
I was in
okay,
the infantry, yeah. So, no, my eyes weren't good enough. But I wanted to. I would have flown L-19s like Jose has. No, it was, all that stuff was good for me because I needed the trip. There's so many sad stories about Vietnam and all that, but my war wasn't that bad. I never got hit. I took night patrols every time I could because I just had to. I just had a chip on my shoulder, and these guys, usually a night patrol is led by a lieutenant and a non-com, a sergeant. And so we would take the patrols out, and then if you didn't take the patrol as the non-com, we would go as tail gunner because there were 10 people on patrol, and you had to trust the guy at the back of the line. So I was always out. I'd volunteer either to be a tail gunner, and we'd walk out through Korea at night. I never wore. I had to wear glasses, but I never put them on because I didn't want to get caught without glasses. So it was good for me though. They made me a squad. I had a VAR, and then they made me a squad leader, and. I had all the instincts of being in charge. The Doberman blood was still there, but we were all just buddies. I mean, it's like everything else, it's true. You do it for your friends. You go out together. I almost stayed there a second time, and then I thought, no, I guess I won't. And when I got home, I thought, oh God, what was I thinking? But I know one guy re-upped, and he got hit that day, and I dragged him back up into the trench, and his leg was all torn open. He said, I'm going to go home now, right? And I said, yeah, you're going to go home. That's all he could think of is, thank God I get to go home. Because he knew he screwed up to re-up for a year. It was like that. But it wasn't, and it was really good. I mean, refugees, it's so easy for me to take a political side, which I won't even go into. But refugees come down the road, and all they want is to get behind you. And in the meantime, you're standing on a garbage dump with a rifle, keeping people from eating garbage. And where they were coming from was just a bad place, North Korea. And then the Chinese came into the war, and that's who we were really fighting. And they were like ants. They were just like watching, drop a piece of bacon on the ground and watch the ants come over. That's what they would do to hills. And it was really good for me. I was gung-ho because I felt like I needed to be. I didn't get hurt. I was scared, but I was never bummed out about being there. But nobody had drugs. Nobody had anything to smoke. We had whiskey. And I went to Japan and got a bottle of whiskey for $2. And we had a little second lieutenant that got a Christmas card to baby on his first Christmas away from home. So I got on my whiskey and I went by to see him, and he had I'm rambling, now. You could shut it. Anyway, he had a bottle of whiskey under the bed, and all us squad leaders were in his bunker. And he said, well, time for a drink. And he reached down and got his bottle and uncorked it and took a drink. And that really, that got me. So when I got back with my bottle, I went into his bunker. I said, hey, baby, it's time for a drink. And I've got it with me. And just razzed him. So they took my squad away from me. The sergeant said, you can't do that. He's an officer. You're like you're at court martial. I said, yeah, but and so we went out that night. His name was Jackson, and he got lost. And we're out in the middle of this great big valley. There's Chinese everywhere. You could smell them. You could smell garlic. And he said, I think we want to go that way. And he pointed. The hill was right there, and our front lines were on top of the hill. And I said, yeah, but that's where the Thailanders are. If we go up that hill, they will kill us. And he said, no, that's where we're going. And I said, no, we're not. And so he took his helmet, he took his rifle, and slowly he just kicked his boots along like a little kid, making noise, especially because he knew we were trying to be quiet. He was a baby. So baby's walking along, and so then halfway home he says, well, we don't need to say anything about this. And I said, no, but boy, it just really, I just worked him. I said, it just really eats on me that I lost my squad because I was so rude to you about the whiskey. And I didn't mean anything bad, but, really, it was a dumb thing to do. And so when we got next morning, they said, okay, DeCreeft, you got your squad back. And I wasn't even a citizen. And then I wasn't a citizen because I was born in France, raised in Spain with a Spanish father. And at that time, when the wife married a foreigner, she lost her citizenship. And then when they got divorced in 38, the law was still in effect that she got it back. So that made me a citizen. But no papers, I couldn't get naturalized. And when I tried, they said, oh, you're already a citizen. So I applied for citizenship papers. And I got this letter that said, your citizenship papers are denied. And I got up and I went to see Jackson. I said, I'm done. It's not my ward. I'm going home. He said, get back in your holding, Jeff. And those are the things you remember. And this is 55 years ago. So when I got back, I got a passport. That's all I've got.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Even now?
Oh yeah. You can't. I'm a Coley Picard citizen, and that was a court case by a guy named Coley Picard. And they gave him citizenship based on the fact that his mother was a citizen, and when they got divorced, she became a citizen again, and that made her kids citizens.
Oh.
But not by birth, because I wasn't born here. And so I might be a little bit like Obama. He may have this same
Just thinking the same
I
thing.
think I could be president.
I think
But I
the
told
same.
everybody, I want to be emperor. No president for me. I'll take the country, but I'll just take it my way. But anyway, I went down to Mexico. I went to San Diego. And about 10 miles north of town was all these cars, and cops are standing there. I said, go over there. I said, where are you born? Paris, France. Okay, go over there. And about 10 o'clock at night, finally this guy comes up to me. He says, I said, I'm a Coley Picard citizen, but I don't have papers. But I had just gotten my water rating at Catalina in a Goose. And the temporary certificate was about this big. And I said, here, look, see, it says U.S. citizen. And he said, oh, yeah, well, no. That was it, after 5 hours by the side of the road. So I'm really jumpy. I go everywhere with a passport now.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, gang, I've got lots of stories.
So you've been flying since, professionally, when did you start?
Yeah, I did. I didn't make any money at it till I came up here. And really, Barbara and I came up here with I pointed them because they're kids, but her mother and Jose next door, we came up here, and I just camped in Fairbanks for a while, and then I heard about a job in Homer, and it was $750 a month, and I thought, oh man. And so I went to work here, and then at the end of the summer I busted my butt, went out, came back to this town, and started flying again.
Wow.
And I worked my way up to that airplane, the Otter. But it's, to be philosophical about it all of a sudden you realize this is where you spent your life. You don't come to Homer because that's where you want to be the rest of your life. That's where your friends are. If you're going to have a party, this is where it's going to be. If you go anywhere, you all go together to Hawaii or Mexico, whatever it is. And I didn't like this town because it was a fisherman's town, and fishermen are really close to the chest.
Clans.
You say, how are you doing? Oh, scratching up a few, but you know how it is. If the weather's good, there's no fish. I'd say, well, bullshit, I see them, they're right there. and in Fairbanks, it was, hey, I made $10 today. Everybody down in the Big I, I'm buying a beer. It was just the difference, all the difference in the world. They're so open and friendly and full of fun, But we made our own mob here, we made our own parties, and we've had a lot of fun.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, and now, when people say, who are you? I say, I'm Jose's dad. That's who I am, or Caroline's grandfather. That's my main claim to fame. She's a really great hockey player. You wouldn't know it. This will embarrass you, but she is. She's a starting forward, and she looks
Way to
like.
go.
Are you not?
I am, but
Okay,
when you say
and-
starting forward, it sounds
Well,
like you're going to be
if
like,
I'm going to brag, you
Yeah,
better.
yeah,
you
that's-
better brag.
Grandfather's a knight, so what does
Yeah.
that make you, honey?
Yeah. Put a coat of arms on your
You're a
chest.
duchess somewhere.
That's right. There you go. And they look like I think it was Ann that said they look like Tasmanian devils. They're out there
They're just-
just fighting like this, and then you take all this stuff off them, and they're sweet little girls, frail and sweating. And saying, oh yeah, that was a lot of fun. Meantime, they
Beat
got
the
a
crap
stick
out of
hooked in their
somebody.
throat, or they got a concussion.
Remember that when you're dating.
That's it. Yeah, get a stick in their throat. It'll slow them right down.
But are you doing acting too?
Yes, she is. She's in Pirouette.
Oh,
She's got leading parts in all 3 plays, right?
well,
See, if it wasn't for me, nobody would even know you existed.
See, he's your best
You are.
I
advertiser.
am. I'm
I can
her
say I knew you
Promoter,
would.
agent.
You can't leave because she might get in an argument, and I'm not there to say, just a minute, here's what she said.
Interpret for her.
That's right.
No, that's it.
Anyway,
No. Oh.
no, it's. I'll round it off because it has been a neat place to be. You're a big frog in a little pond, and you're working with your friends. And if somebody's hurt, you're the one they call. And if somebody needs a part for a boat, you're the one they call. And you're always helping people out, and you get to jump in and be there. Most of the time, if something happens, you're standing on the outside edge, and they say, "Keep moving, folks. Nothing here to see." But here, you're it. I mean, you're doing it, and there they are, and you fix them up, drag them in. So it's changed now because they have helicopters. They had just big old albatrosses, and they couldn't get in and out of these small places. So actually, the Coast Guard would call me up and say, "Bill, would you take a look at Port Dick?" When I got 2 citations, which is a good thing in the Coast Guard, and one of them was for going out in bad weather and finding a boat that had already sunk in Kamishak, and everybody was hanging on to crab pot buoys, and they were drifting on the beach. It was really bad. A search and rescue helicopter turned around in Augustine, said it couldn't be done. So I went bopping down there and found them. But that got me a deal. And the next time, I just went over they were missing in Port Dick. I went over a beautiful day, landed in the water to take a leak. I looked at the beach, and there's 2 people standing there saying, I picked him up and brought him to town. And I got another citation. You know, you win some, you lose some. So, anyway, I'm done.
Yeah, we lived in Cordova for a while, and first year we got back, I drove the kids down here. I was doing the thing to drive as far as I could go north and as far as I could go south. So they covered the entire Alaska Highway, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we had 5 kids, and
Went to
Mitch was
Valdez.
always gone, so we did the whole,
Yeah.
you know, when they came
now I gotta
here,
go.
this is the first time they went, "Oh, this feels like Cordova," because they just missed
Yeah,
that so
yeah.
much, that it just had that
I
feel
know,
and the
I coulda
water
had
and the spit. And the
I could have had an air taxi in Seward,
Oh,
but I didn't
yeah,
like it.
yeah.
You know, the canneries had come home
Yeah,
to Seward.
it has a different
This
feel.
is 20 or 30 years
Yeah.
ago, you know, but I just didn't like it because it's all closed in,
Right.
and rain. This is neat, and you
Yeah,
can
this
get in
is
your car
open.
and drive anyway.
Exactly.
From New
Oh,
York.
right.
Yeah, yeah, I felt the same way, that we kind of,
Yeah.
because you know, we were stationed in different places around,
Yeah.
you know, we always, you can choose on there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have traded it for the world, but boy, you know, I said we did our time in Dillingham, and, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, there's certain areas you
Well,
don't
Bethel,
want
were
to
you
go
ever in
back to.
Bethel?
No, but, yeah,
That's the one.
No.
I've been there, but
yeah, no, my kids just had played ball.
we always
or-
call it
What I wanna
Bethel
do is
maintenance.
rub
when
it
you-
in.
Bethel maintenance.
That Bethel
Yeah.
maintenance,
The door flapping against the window. About a third of the way through.
yeah, there's Palmer basketball too, why not?
I like to, 'cause, you know, the church fall, everybody brings home meat. And
Oh, wow,
their
yeah,
clothes
so he
are all
knows
bloody
that
and they
they're.
smell good. So Bosco knows to eat airplanes, but
She's a beautiful
I don't know. I don't think he's really gotten old this year.
Right?
Yeah, he likes Jose.
Fire up, yeah.
Well,
Jose's-
the wolves
he
don't
comes here
live that long,
when
so.
Jim would get drunk. I don't like to talk in front of Jim, but when Jim gets drunk, it's for a while.
Is it? Yeah,
Bosco
anytime a
just
good one
leaves.
on.
He just leaves. Comes down here and
He deserts his pack, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah, he just. And Jose really likes him. We both do. But Jose would have adopted
That's nice
him.
to
And
know,
we
yeah.
always used to hope that he'd just stay away.
Yeah, yeah.
Just forget Jim and live with us. It was a
He's
Beaver.
close, he's close.
Beaver or Otter.
He's a good craftsman, though.
Oh, Jim's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
They broke a rib and he still was after him. So I let him over and I said, Sarah,
Hey, baby, you're so
you're
pretty.
pretty full of activity
You're
for
so
guys.
pretty.
Exactly.
Yes, you are.
I think they got fools out of him. And
Oh,
they
yeah,
just-
never
they-
said on
yeah.
there, yeah. No, I am partial to those Arabs, but yeah, they are just not. And she took them from Alaska to Texas, back to Montana.
Oh, my
Has
gosh.
carried these Arabs all over the
Maddie says she won't tell if you bring
I
her.
promise. Oh, and he says, I know where she's going.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that, yeah. Uh-huh.
Don't watch Maddie. She's-
Oh.
Tell her slow, because she'll get your fingers.
Oh, the older, but he's
That's good.
Aw.
There,
There
now.
he goes. Now he's happy. Okay, I can.